The bet was stupid. That's the part I keep coming back to even now, months later, when I trace the whole disaster back to its source and try to find the exact second my life split in half. It was stupid, a bar bet, a dare between two grown adults who should have known better. And yet here she was, at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, standing in the middle of my apartment in nothing but an oversized gray t-shirt and a pair of black shorts that barely qualified as clothing, her hair still damp from my shower. Leaning against my bedroom doorframe with a smile I had seen 100 times before but had never, not once, allowed myself to read correctly. "Win the bet," Nora whispered, "and I'll do anything you want." I was 29 years old. I had been her best friend since we were 19. I had watched her fall in love with two different men, cry over one of them on my couch, and get engaged to a third one 7 months ago. That ring was still on her finger. I could see it catching the low amber light from the lamp on my nightstand as she braced her hand against the doorframe. And the sight of it should have been enough to end whatever this was before it started. It was Nora. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in a plain white t-shirt and sweatpants, phone forgotten in my hand, and I could feel every inch of the 6 feet of hardwood floor between us like it was live wire. "You're drunk. I had 2 glasses of wine 4 hours ago," she said. "Try again. You're engaged. I know what I am." Her eyes didn't move from mine. "Do you?" "The bet." I forced my brain back to the bet because it was safer ground, or at least I told myself it was. Earlier that evening she had shown up at my door with a bottle of Pinot and the specific brittle brightness she wore whenever she and Marcus had fought. She hadn't said his name. She never did on nights like this. She just kicked off her heels in my entryway, curled her legs up under her on my couch and said, "Distract me," so I had. I had put on the terrible reality show we both pretended to hate, and somewhere around the second episode she had bet me, with the kind of laughing seriousness that was her signature, that I couldn't guess which of the 6 remaining contestants would be sent home. Loser had to grant one wish, anything the winner wanted. "Within reason," she'd added, and I had laughed and said, "Since when do you do anything within reason, Nora?" I had one. Of course I had one. I always won when it came to reading people, and she knew it, which is why she had made the bet in the first place. I understood that now. I understood a lot of things now that I hadn't understood 10 minutes ago, when she had walked out of my bathroom with wet hair and my old college t-shirt hanging off one shoulder and said, casually, that she was staying the night because it was too late to drive home. Marcus was in Chicago until Thursday. She wasn't going back to their empty apartment. She was going to sleep in my bed, she informed me, and I could take the couch because she was the guest. I had agreed because I was an idiot, because I had been an idiot about Nora Vance for exactly 10 years and 3 months. "So," she said now from the doorway. The gray t-shirt slipped a little further down her shoulder and she didn't fix it. "You won." "Collect." Nora, stop. "Why?" "Because you don't mean it." Something in her face went very, very still. She stepped into the room, one bare foot in front of the other, and I felt the muscles in my back lock. My bedroom was not a large room. There were maybe 4 steps between the door and where I was sitting, and she took 3 of them before she stopped. Close enough that I could see the faint constellation of freckles on her collarbone and the pulse jumping in her throat and the way her lower lip was slightly bitten, like she'd been chewing it on the way down the hall. "Ask me if I mean it," she said quietly. "Nora, ask me, Ethan." The lamp was behind her. Her damp hair was throwing off the faint smell of my shampoo, which was a detail I was going to have to live with for the rest of my life. I could see her chest rising and falling too fast under the thin cotton, and I could see her hand at her side, and I could see the ring, that stupid, beautiful ring. And I still opened my mouth and said, "Do you mean it?" "Yes, say it clearly." "I mean it." Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. "I have meant it since I was 20. I have meant it every single day since then, and I am so tired, Ethan. I am so tired of being the good one." I closed my eyes. I actually closed my eyes like a man trying not to look at a car crash, and I felt the mattress dip as she sat down next to me. Close enough that our knees touched through the fabric of my sweatpants, and the touch was so light and so devastating that I made a sound in the back of my throat I did not authorize. "Open your eyes," she said. No, Ethan, no, Nora, because if I open my eyes, I'm going to do something we can't undo, and one of us has to be the adult here, and it has clearly never been you. She laughed. It was a wet, uneven laugh, and I felt her forehead come to rest against the side of my jaw, and her breath was warm and unsteady on my neck. And I gripped the edge of the mattress with both hands until my knuckles turned white. You're allowed to want things, she whispered against my skin. That's allowed. It doesn't make you a bad person. You're engaged to my friend. He's not your friend, he's your coworker. There's a difference and you know it. Nora asked me if I love him. I did not want to ask her that. I did not want to open that door because I already knew what was behind it, and I had spent 7 months keeping my hand off the knob out of some sad, exhausted respect for the shape my life had been asked to take. But she was pressed against my shoulder, and my whole body was one long, trembling line of restraint, and the word came out of me anyway. Do you? No. I opened my eyes. She was already looking at me. From that distance, her eyes were huge and wet and gold-brown in the lamplight, and she wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't performing anything anymore, and I understood with a slow, sinking horror that I was not going to survive this night in one piece. I have never loved him, she said. I said yes because my mother was dying and she wanted to see me settled. I said yes because Marcus is safe and steady, and he never makes me feel like I'm going to jump out of my own skin. I said yes because you were dating Priya at the time, and I thought, she swallowed. I thought if I couldn't have the thing I actually wanted, I could at least have something. And now my mother is gone and Priya is gone, and I am sitting in your bedroom in your t-shirt, and you won the bet, Ethan, you won, so collect. There was a small, tight silence. What do you want me to ask for? I said, and my voice did not sound like my voice. Her hand came up. She touched my jaw with 2 fingers, careful, like I might break, and her thumb brushed the corner of my mouth, and I felt the ring, cold and small, drag once against my skin. She saw the moment I registered it. Her eyes flickered down to her own hand, and something shifted in her expression, and without looking away from me, she slid the ring off her finger and set it on my nightstand with a small, definitive click. Ask for anything, she said, anything at all. I kissed her. I want to be honest because this is my story and I am the one telling it, and I have had enough time now to stop pretending. I kissed her. I did not wait for her to close the distance. I did not do the tortured, honorable thing where I stood up and walked out of the room and made her come find me. I put my hand on the back of her neck into her damp hair, and I pulled her mouth to mine like a man reaching for water after 10 years in a desert. And she made a small broken sound against my lips that I am going to hear until I die. She tasted like the mint of my toothpaste. Her mouth was soft and hungry and slightly clumsy, the way people kiss when they have wanted something for too long and forgotten how to hold their own hands still. And I felt her fingers fist in the front of my t-shirt and pull, and I felt the mattress shift as she came up onto her knees beside me. And I felt every ordinary line I had ever drawn about who I was and what kind of man I was, and I stepped over all of them in one clean motion without regret. She pulled back first, only far enough to breathe against my mouth. Her forehead was against mine, and her hands were still fisted in my shirt, and she was shaking, and I realized after a second that I was shaking too. Say something, she whispered. I've wanted this, I said, since the night you spilled red wine on my white couch at my 22nd birthday party and cried about it for an hour. She laughed, wet and shocked, and pressed her face into my neck. I ruined that couch, she said. You ruined a lot of things. Am I ruining this? I put my arms around her. I pulled her into my lap, gray t-shirt and damp hair and all, and I felt her legs settle on either side of mine, and I put my mouth against the corner of her jaw and I said, not yet, we didn't do anything else. Not that night. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me and because it mattered to her. We kissed until my mouth was numb and hers was pink and swollen, and she cried a little, silently, into my shoulder, and I held her while she did. And at some point around 2 in the morning, she fell asleep in my bed with her hand curled loosely around my wrist. And I lay on top of the covers next to her, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling and understood, very clearly, that I had just committed a small and unforgivable act of arson against 3 separate lives. Hers, mine, and Marcus's. I did not sleep. At 6 a.m. I made coffee. She came out of the bedroom in the same t-shirt, barefoot, her hair a soft catastrophe, and she stood in my kitchen doorway looking at me like she wasn't sure I would still be there. Which was, I suppose, fair. I handed her a mug. She wrapped both hands around it. The ring was not on her finger. It was, I assumed, still on my nightstand. "Are you going to tell him?" I asked. She looked into her coffee for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "but not today. He's in Chicago. I'm not going to do it over the phone. He deserves my face." "Okay, are you going to be here?" she said. "When I do?" "Yes, even if he—" "Yes, Nora." She nodded once, sharp, and drank her coffee. "Marcus got back on Thursday." She told him on Thursday night. I know this because at 11:12 on Thursday night my phone rang, and it was Marcus, and I answered it standing in the middle of my living room because I owed him at least that much. And he did not shout. "That was almost worse," he said very calmly. 10 years, Ethan." She said, "This has been going on for 10 years, and I said, "Not the way you mean," and he said, "There is no other way to mean it," and then he hung up. At work on Friday he did not look at me. On Monday he transferred to the Denver office. He did not say goodbye. I got an email from HR 2 weeks later informing me that a formal complaint regarding personal conduct affecting workplace dynamics had been filed and subsequently withdrawn. And I understood that Marcus had come very close to burning my career down and had, in the end, chosen not to, and I could not decide if that made me more or less ashamed. Nora's mother had been gone 8 months. Her father, when she told him, did not shout either. He simply said, "Your mother would be very disappointed in you," and hung up, and Nora sat on my kitchen floor with her back against my dishwasher and cried until she couldn't breathe. I sat next to her. I did not say it will be okay, because I did not know if it would be. I said, "I'm here," and I said it every time she came up for air, and eventually she leaned her whole weight against me and I felt her go quiet. And I understood that this was going to be the shape of the next year of our lives. Her breaking and me refusing to move. Her sister stopped speaking to her. Her college roommate staged something that Nora, with grim humor, called an intervention brunch, at which she was informed that she was throwing her life away for a man who had clearly been quietly grooming her friendship for a decade. She left before the entrees came. She called me from her car in the parking lot. She said, "Am I throwing my life away?" And I said, "Do you feel like you're throwing your life away?" And she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "No. I feel like I finally picked it up. I want to tell you it got easier after that. It didn't, not immediately." She moved out of the apartment she had shared with Marcus in a single afternoon, boxes hauled by me and by 2 of her cousins who were not, technically, on speaking terms with her but who showed up anyway because the Vances are like that. She stayed on my couch for 3 weeks because she said she needed to know that we could survive proximity without the excuse of a bet, and I let her, and it nearly killed me. I made her breakfast. She left her toothbrush in my bathroom. She wore my sweatshirts. I kissed her at the kitchen sink one Tuesday morning with a mouthful of orange juice, and she laughed so hard she choked, and I thumped her on the back and thought, "Oh, this is what my life is going to be like now," and I felt something in my chest that I recognized after a startled second as happiness. Actual, unpolished, non-hypothetical happiness. It was terrifying. 3 weeks in, she moved into her own apartment 4 blocks from mine. She said, "I want to be able to miss you," and I said, "That's aggressive," and she said, "I'm an aggressive woman, Ethan. Please try to keep up," and she kissed me on the cheek at her new doorway and closed the door in my face, and I stood in her hallway laughing like an idiot for a solid minute before I went home. We tried very hard to do it properly after that. We went on dates, real ones, in daylight at restaurants where the waiter did not know either of our names. She wore lipstick that I had not seen since we were 23. I wore a shirt with buttons. We held hands across small tables and talked about our jobs and our childhoods and the 10 years we had spent pretending, and we were, I think, both surprised by how much of each other we still did not know. She had never told me, for instance, that she had almost dropped out of college in our junior year. I had never told her that I had bought a ring for Priya and then, 3 weeks before I planned to propose, taken it back to the jeweler because I had opened my sock drawer one morning and thought, if I do this, I will never be able to look at Nora at the wedding. You almost proposed to Priya, she said, across a plate of pasta, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. I almost did a lot of things. Ethan, I didn't, I said, that's the point. I didn't. She set her fork down. She reached across the table. She took my hand and she looked at me with those huge gold-brown eyes and she said quietly, I would have come to the wedding. I would have worn a beautiful dress and I would have hated her forever and I would never have told you why. I know, you know, Nora, I said, I have known since I was 20. Give me some credit, her mouth trembled. She squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. Then why, she said, did we waste 10 years? I didn't have a good answer for that. I still don't. Fear mostly. The specific cowardice of people who have too much to lose. I had been afraid that if I said it out loud and she didn't feel the same way, I would lose my best friend. She had been afraid of the same thing in reverse. We had both been so busy protecting the friendship that we had suffocated the thing underneath it, and by the time we finally cracked the lid off, half the people in our lives had already decided we were monsters, and there was nothing to be done about that except live in a way that made them wrong. There were harder nights. There was the night about 6 weeks in when Marcus called her from Denver. She sat on the edge of my bed with the phone against her ear and did not speak for 11 minutes. When she hung up, she set the phone down very carefully like it was made of glass and she said, he wanted to know if I ever loved him at all, and I said, what did you tell him? And she said, I told him yes. Just not the way he needed. Then she cried and I held her and I did not say anything because there was nothing to say. She had done a cruel thing to a decent man. I had helped her. We were going to have to carry that, both of us, for the rest of our lives. I made peace with it that night in a slow, quiet way, lying on my back with her curled against my ribs. I decided that the only way to justify what we had done was to be so unmistakably in love that the wreckage looked, in retrospect, unavoidable. It was not a noble decision. It was, however, mine. There was the night her father called. He had not spoken to her in 4 months. She answered on the second ring and she cried immediately, silently, before he even said anything, and he said, gruffly, your mother wanted you to be happy, Nora. She said that to me the week before she died. I forgot. I'm sorry, I forgot. Nora said, Dad, and he said, bring him to dinner Sunday, and hung up. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, I think we have to go, and I said, I know, and we went, and her father shook my hand at the door and did not smile exactly, but he did not smile, and it was a beginning. There was the night her sister showed up at Nora's apartment at midnight, drunk, and stood in the hallway crying and saying she was sorry. Nora let her in. They talked until 4 a.m. I stayed on the couch with a book I was not reading and pretended not to hear any of it. In the morning, her sister hugged me on the way out, briefly and with great awkwardness, and said, you'd better be worth it, and I said, I'm trying, and she said, try harder, and left. I liked her, I still do. And there was the night 7 months in when Nora came home to my apartment, because by then it was our apartment, in every way except the lease, and dropped her bag on the floor and said, I got the promotion, and I said, Nora, that's amazing, and she said, they want me in the London office for 6 months starting in September, and the whole room went still. We looked at each other for a long moment. Come with me, she said, my job, quit. Nora, Ethan, I am not asking you to quit. I am telling you that I am asking you to quit, and I am aware of the difference, and I am asking anyway. I sat down on the arm of the couch. I looked at her. She was standing in the middle of our living room in a black work dress and heels she had already half kicked off, one hand on her hip, her hair coming out of its clip. And she looked terrified and defiant in exactly equal measure, and I thought about the ring on my nightstand 10 months ago and the small definitive click it had made when she set it down. And I thought, she has already burned everything down once for this. It is my turn, okay, I said. She blinked. Okay, Nora. I'll come. She crossed the room in 3 steps and climbed into my lap on the arm of the couch, and I nearly went over backwards, and she was laughing and crying and calling me an idiot. And I was holding on to her with both arms to keep us upright, and somewhere in the middle of it I realized I was laughing too, and I realized, further, that I could not remember the last time in the previous 10 years I had laughed like that, without any part of me held in reserve. It turned out that reserve had been a full-time job. I had not known how tired I was until I put it down. We are in London now as I write this. It is raining because of course it is. Nora is asleep in the next room, in a rented flat with terrible water pressure and a view of a very ugly brick wall. And there is a small ring in the drawer of my nightstand that is not the ring she wore for Marcus. I bought it 3 weeks ago. I have not asked yet. I am waiting for the right moment, which is a stupid thing to wait for, because with Nora the right moment has always been every moment, and I have always been slow to see it. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow, maybe when she comes home from work in the rain with her hair frizzing and complaining about the tube. Maybe I will just say it in the kitchen while she is complaining about the tube. That feels right, actually. That feels like us. I lost a lot to be here. I lost a coworker who was, if I am honest, my closest work friend. I lost the easy version of myself, the one who could pretend he was a good person because he had never been tested. I lost the approval of some people I had known my whole life, and I gained the wary respect of others who watched me stand in the wreckage and not run. Nora lost more. She lost a fiancé, a father for a while, a sister for a while, a whole polished future she had been assembling since she was 22. She says on the nights when she is honest that she did not know she had been holding her breath until she let it out. She says her lungs still hurt sometimes. She says it is worth it. I believe her. I have to. There is no version of this story where I get to be uncertain about that, because if I am uncertain, then I am just a man who blew up his best friend's engagement over a bar bet. And I am not going to be that man. I am going to be instead the man who won the bet and asked, when she said anything at all, for the only thing he had ever actually wanted, which was her, all of her. The messy, engaged, terrified, gold brown-eyed, complicated, brilliant, damp-haired her, sitting on the edge of his bed at 11:47 on a Tuesday night with her ring hand shaking. I asked and she gave. We are still paying for it. We will probably always be paying for it, in small, quiet installments. At Christmas dinners and at chance encounters in coffee shops and in the specific silence that falls whenever anyone at a party mentions Marcus's name. I have made my peace with the bill, so has she. Some loves are cheap and some are expensive, and ours came, it turns out, with a very long invoice, and I would sign it again. I would sign it in blood. I would sign it with her sitting in my lap on the arm of a couch in London, laughing and calling me an idiot, and I would not read the fine print because I already know what it says. It says this is the person, everything else is a detail. So that is the story of the night my best friend stayed over at my house and whispered, "Win the bet and I'll do anything you want," and I did, and she did, and neither of us has been the same since. If you had been standing in that doorway 10 years too late, wearing someone else's ring and telling the truth for the first time in a decade, would you have stepped into the room? Or would you have turned around and gone back to the life everyone else had picked out for you? Be honest, I won't tell. If this story moved you, if it made you ache a little in a place you'd forgotten about, leave me a like so I know you're out there. Drop me a comment and tell me, did we do the right thing or the honest thing, or are those sometimes the same thing? And if you want more stories like this one, the risky kind, the messy kind, the kind that don't apologize for wanting what they want, subscribe. Stay with me. There's a whole shelf of nights like that Tuesday, and I'm going to tell you every single one of them.